you looked at the content warning. Are you ready? I'm going to assume you're ready now if you're still watching. So I was banned from Comic Fury. This has shaken me greatly. The prospect of people thinking I'm pro-abuse really upsets me. So I feel compelled to lay out exactly what I think of CSA and pedophilia. So it's harmful to think about children sexually because if you do, then you either have the choice to truthfully tell people that you do or hide it. And both options, well, the first option is abusive, and the second option, it's a lie essentially, and that limits people's agency. But when you're faced with a lesser of two evils option such as that, it usually means someone screwed up beforehand, in this case, you. In short, what would be destroyed by the truth should be. If you look at things through agency maximizing consequentialism as opposed to happiness maximizing consequentialism, which runs into some horrific problems like it's okay to build a utopia powered by a forsaken child, or it's okay to sacrifice us all to a utility monster that experiences happiness many, many times more than we do. But with agency maximizing consequentialism, there are obvious those things will not be moral according to agency maximizing consequentialism. And in this case, because we talk about thought crimes and stuff, right? That it is actually perfectly consistent for a happiness maximizing consequentialist to not care about thought crimes, because if the thoughts stay in your head, they actually don't affect anyone. But in this case, it affects your ability to do a moral thing following up on that. But you can't, which means the initial moral screw-up is deliberately having those thoughts in the first place. Okay, a bit of a tangent here. I don't feel comfortable using the word pedophile uncritically because paraphilia theory has issues. I don't really have the energy to go into details right now, but two things to note. One thing, it's been used to justify child sexual abuse. And secondly, just consider that historically child marriage used to be widespread and accepted, which is not a good thing, obviously. But if pedophilia was in fact an individual deviancy that only a handful of people in society have and the majority of people do not, then that shouldn't be a thing, even if it was accepted, right? So, but clearly most people these days don't experience pedophilic thoughts or feelings, right? Then that seems to suggest that pedophilia is just an individual deviancy that a select few people just happen to have. But that's probably because we as a society correctly recognize that it's harmful to sexually interact with children. It's kind of like eating a sandwich versus eating a sandwich after knowing the cucumber has been used as a dildo. The physical sensation is the same if the cucumber was well washed, but you still feel gross eating the sandwich after you know where the cucumber has been. Similarly, in this case, it's not a difference in the physical response, it's knowing what such things does to the child. It's also like attraction to adults. If you watch a rape scene, that's going to feel gross, even though if you knew the character was canonically consenting, you'd probably find it hot. Again, the input is the same, it's the valence you associate with it. Anyway, I'll have sources linked in the description. It's a bit of a tangent anyway, it's just telling you why I'm not going to use the word pedophilia or do air quotes whenever I do. So, and this is going to be the hard part to talk about, which is what exactly I mean by thinking about children sexually. The one thing that we really need to understand as a society, which is that arousal is not pleasure. Classic example of this is when people are sexually abused. It's commonly recorded that they would experience sexual arousal, but that absolutely does not mean they enjoyed it in any way whatsoever. But even that account is kind of missing the full picture, because we'd often, in that situation, it's often framed as one's body betraying you for feeling pleasure, but that's still missing the point, because you're still trapped in that arousal equals pleasure framework. By saying that negative experiences of arousal are ego dystonic, you're still assuming arousal is intrinsically pleasurable, and it's a negative experience because the person doesn't want to feel pleasure in the situation, not because the arousal itself is the exact opposite of pleasurable. An example of how arousal could be a negative yet ego-syntonic experience could be if a person was sexually assaulted, but they have extremely low self-worth, despises themselves, and believe they deserve to suffer. Then the profoundly painful experience of sexual assault could be ego-syntonic, as they feel like it's their rightful punishment. However, just because the arousal was ego-syntonic does not at all imply it was pleasurable or that they enjoyed it, any more than a self-harmer enjoyed hurting themselves because they chose to. So when talking about arousal with respect to children, there's two axes here that you can, there's the axes of positive or negative valence. Do you enjoy it or not? Do you feel positively about it? And there's the other axis, which is it deliberate, or is it just an involuntary thing that hops into your head? I drew a diagram somewhere where I posted it up earlier, so I'm not going to go into them. But what we do want to talk about is where they fall on the is it okay to tell people about our axes? Is it abusive to be open about the fact that you have intrusive sexual thoughts about children? But the more pertinent question is whether I believe it's okay to have non-intrusive sexual thoughts about children, and as I said earlier, I don't think so. If the valence is positive, if you truly enjoy those thoughts, it would be abusive to tell people that you have those thoughts deliberately, and arguably even non-deliberately, but less so. As for if it's negative valence, currently I feel it's kind of like thinking about any other atrocity, like fascist genocides. I think it's okay to think about it and even dwell on it in gory detail, and as long as you don't talk about it to people who don't consent to listening to it, and also you have an accurate picture of it as bad, as horrifying. I'm just gonna post my notes in the description. They're not edited, they're super messy, but I'm not exactly succeeding at editing it down to a more coherent form with my talking either, so I'm just gonna chuck it in the description. Finally, for transparency's sake, here are some links leading to things the Comic Fury band may have been referring to. Clearly I don't stand by everything I've said, but you can check for yourself in what sense exactly I was talking about abuse. The most egregious instance, which is not even in a forum, would be a recounting of abuse of an animal that I perpetrated when I was a minor. If you think I should die or something, I won't get mad at you.
What would be destroyed by the truth should be.